we are scared almost to assert, if you like, our way of life and our own history and our own traditions. And I don't know of any other country, frankly, whose elites are so determined the whole time to trash their own history and traditions and to kind of try to put them to one side in the name of trying to make everybody feel welcome. And I often use the example of Japan. Now, Japan is a very culturally homogenous country. It's quite confident about asserting its own culture and its own history. It's had its dark periods in its time, as all countries have, we know that. But nonetheless, now, nobody would look upon Japan now as anything less than a modern, civilized, broadly safe, peaceable nation. And Japan doesn't actively promote hard multiculturalism. It doesn't have open borders. Those people who visit are by and large treated tolerantly, and they've got the freedom to live their own way of life. So the idea that you have to adopt this hard multiculturalism in order to be a civilized country, that you can't have, if you like, a moderate nationalism. I'm not talking about a virulent nationalism, but a moderate nationalism like Japan, where you have a single overarching identifiable culture. You can't have that, because if you do, you're harking back to the 1930s and you're fascist adjacent and all the rubbish that gets spoken about it now. Countries like Japan, and there's other countries as well, I think just completely crush that myth. But we've got a political elite in this country, I think, who are just scared to do that. It's partly ideology and it's partly fear.
I feel like in Europe, nationalism is intrinsically linked to the right because of some of the history here. There are plenty of places where it's a very lefty cause. I mean, even here, some decades ago, in some parts, you were saying before that we had some pride in who we were. Countries like Argentina or Canada, often it's this exposed to the countries that feel like they're in the shadow of, Canada in the shadow of America, maybe Ireland in the shadow of the UK. The left is much fiercer about their nationalism.
Yeah, and even France, I guess, as well, to a certain degree. I mean, I remember when, shortly after Keir Starmer took over as Labour Party leader, 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was now, he gave a speech in front of, I think there were 2 Union flags on either side of him. And various kind of left-wing commentators on social media and elsewhere were horrified by it. People on the left who I knew, and people were saying, well, this shows that the Labour Party is falling for fascism and peddling this kind of right-wing nonsense and what have you. And of course, if a political leader in France stood in front of the tricolour, no one would bat an eyelid, as they wouldn't in most countries, actually.
It is bizarre.
But there's a sense among people across, and you touch on Europe, and we've seen it there as well. We've seen it in France, we've seen it in Italy, we're seeing it in Germany now, we've seen it in Austria, we've seen it in the Netherlands. And I think there's a crossover actually with Britain, in the sense that there are large parts of the populations in these countries, particularly working class people at the lower end of the social and economic scale, if you like, who again have been left behind by globalization, have been told by their political leaders that the new global market will be to their advantage, and largely have found that it hasn't been. If you tie that in with the, more than 15 years now of low economic growth across the West, the impact of deindustrialization, the impact of mass migration in these communities, lots of these people in these countries have begun to assert themselves. You see it with the Gilets jaunes in France, the yellow vest movement, which the left in this country, again, was horrified with. Thought that these people are fascists and, the white working class people marching for sovereignty. How dare they, marching against globalization. And by and large, these people, as I said, are just ordinary working class people who have seen the economic impacts and the social and cultural impacts of globalization in their communities, and have thought, do you know what, this has violated us. We are open, we are welcoming, we are tolerant, but you've just abused our good faith and you haven't delivered the prosperity that you said you were going to deliver. And what we want now is actually a bit more sovereignty, a fairer economic system, more economic justice. We want mass migration migration to be slowed down. We want our governments to be confident about asserting our own identity. It's funny, isn't it? The left are so immersed in identity politics, but when it comes to the identity that most people means most to most people, which is national identity, they say, "Oh no, that's not one we really want to encourage."
That's like our country, because others do embrace it. Japan, as you say. Imagine us going to Japan and saying, why aren't there more people who look like me on TV? I can't be happy unless there are. I mean, I understand that argument, of course, as well, but it just seems so presumptuous to move to a culture and not just try and adapt and fit in.
And there was a story in the Daily Telegraph a couple of days ago where they reported that Parliament is going to remove certain paintings, Lord Nelson being one of them, to make Parliament's artworks more diverse. You get to a point where it is quite obvious that many among the elites just dislike British history and British traditions. Now that's their view. If that's what they want to feel, that's up to them. But when they try to impose it on everybody else, when the rest of the country can see actually we've got a ruling class that by and large dislikes the country and its traditions, and is constantly, in the name of diversity, promoting other traditions and other cultures, it just makes people react. And I think to a certain degree, if you look at the unrest that followed Southport last year, that wasn't just about the horrific murders that had taken place in Southport. That was, if you like, a catalyst for it. But I think it was something connected to a much deeper and longer lasting resentment in many of these communities over economic injustice, but over the scale of immigration and the lack of integration, and the level of crime in some communities and so on. And I'm not expressing, by the way, any sympathy here with the people who went out and did violence in their communities. Those people deserve to be locked up. But beyond those people, I think there was a large body of people who just felt actually we need to push back against an elite class in this country that just shows day after day it doesn't really like our country, doesn't like our traditions, at the same time as venerating almost other traditions and other cultures. I think that's become quite obvious.